Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lost in Translation show, where we explore the past to help people understand what is happening to mankind today, where we focus on the structures that control our lives. With that in mind, we once again turn our attention to the authoritarian, eugenicist slave system dark force known as communism. Contrary to the history and atrocities of this political movement of death, famine, enslavement, and absolute control over its citizens, and a system that breaks the minds of its captives. American politicians, educators, media, and organizations like the United Nations and the European Union, with its unelected officials, continue to move our society toward Marxism and communism as the solution to the world's problems. To dispel these myths and other misconceptions about communism and the joyless existence of its captives, TSERMAA DALAI, who was raised under communism in northern central Mongolia. She grew up in a nomadic family, and she spent her youth in the fields tending flocks and herds and had plenty of time to think and contemplate. As a student of the mind since childhood, she grew up under a communist regime, and it was like being in a prison. Now she is a proud American who has traveled and seen many parts of the world, something she would not have been able to do under the communist rule. She believes that America is the best place on earth and warns us that we must be vigilant in protecting our country not to be swallowed up by unseen dark forces. She's a fashion designer, esthetician, and life coach. She does not believe in just existing to pay the bills or focus on buying nice things. As a lifelong learner, she believes that each person should find their purpose. She continues her incredible journey of lifelong learning, and she is enjoying a fulfilling life that seeks to fulfill God's purpose for her life with a grateful heart and a deep appreciation of what the American dream has allowed her to achieve. So without further ado, welcome.
Hello.
It's so
Thank
nice
you
to
for
have
having
you.
me. Yes, I'm glad to be here.
Oh, well, thank you.
Beautiful day.
It's a beautiful day. We're here on the Sacramento River at the Sundial River Park, and she's visiting from out of town. And we just met the other day, and we decided to spend the afternoon so we can learn a little bit about communism and also about her life in Mongolia. Did you want to tell us a little bit about your life in Mongolia before you came to the United States?
Yeah, well, I grew up, I was born in a nomadic family and grew up moving like 4 times a year and tending herds and flocks. So as you said earlier, so I had plenty time to think and contemplate out in the field. And Mongolia is a beautiful country, and the field is just beautiful. But anyhow, and then my parents moved a little bit closer to the settlement to send us to school, but still they had the cattle and animals. So then we went to school, and I tell you, going to school under that communist regime was like prison, especially if you are thought to think for yourself, because you were not allowed to think for yourself. You were not allowed to be your own unique individual person. And they controlled everything. Clothing, even like you go to the store and there was only like 2 cuts, maybe maximum 3 different colors. So like basically everybody was uniform, right? I mean, the schools, we had to wear uniform. And then at workers, my parents, they had to wear uniforms, and there was not much different other thing going on. So I loved fashion since very young, and I used to change the uniform style, and I got into trouble with the school a few times. They took me to the principal office and questioned me what the meaning of this. So rebelling against the system. because you were not allowed to think for yourself. You were to do what you told to do. And if you do that, then you are a great student and there might be some reward. But if you're not, you are in trouble. So, yeah.
What were some of the biggest
And
challenges? Oh.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Oh, I was just saying, so besides your schooling and that, what other kind of challenges did your family face under communism? You said you moved 4 times a year. So were you living in like tents, or how, when you moved several times a year, were there different structures for you to join in those different
No,
areas, or
so
how did that
Mongol
work?
gir. So in Western, they call it yurt. It's a felt around home with a wooden skeleton and then tent over and then canvas against the rain and snow. So it's amazing. So it's gir for us, but then it's Western they call it yurt. So I grew up in Gir, and we moved 4 times a year. So because it's a portable home, they used to break them down, put on a. My father worked for the government. He was a tractor driver, so transport and then move. Um, and then it's pretty Gir is pretty cozy because there's a fireplace right in the middle. And then in winter, we never get really cold inside home because we had a fire and we had to cook on the fire. There was no electricity growing up like that. And sometimes on special occasions, something my father would have his tractor battery onto lights, especially at night if they were slaughtering, sheep or something. But I grew up under candlelight, mostly. So the ghee is made out of the milk product, and that they would put. So that way, that was their like homemade candle, you know. So I grew up under reading many many nights under candlelight. I was curious, and I loved reading.
Now, was there a chimney? You said there was a fireplace inside. Was it more like a cook stove?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Right.
right in the middle, there's a fireplace, and usually most of the fireplaces are like round, but some can be square. And then there's a chimney right goes through the ton. Ton is like a roof, and it had windows opening. And so some families, my family, they made a really nice windows actually with glass and frame, and then they can just pop it with something and drop the window down, but not, they still will hang on the structure. So yeah, there was a chimney right in the middle and go up. And when it rains, thunderstorm, no fire, we would take the chimney down and then cover it completely. So the gear had a cover with the felt and canvas and cotton. So the whole around corner, and the half of it is covered with that. And then the other half where the chimney comes out and some windows. So when there's a storm, especially, we take the chimney down and then cover it completely.
That's so much different than most of us. California. I grew up in California in a big farmhouse on a farm, and our roof was stable, but we did have a fireplace. So it's probably the only similarity. That must be such an interesting way to grow up, and you've seen the world now, and it just must be so amazing for you to be here in America after that journey.
Yeah.
Now, what are the biggest challenges that your family faced? Did you have to learn Russian?
Yes, we all were mandated to study Russian since fourth grade. So let's say about maybe, because that time, we started school when we were 8 years old and then graduated high school when we were 18. So we were mandated to study Russian at age 12, starting like fourth grade, so something like that. Yeah, and usually Russian teacher will come and we'll have one or two Russian teachers schools.
Now,
And the challenge.
Go ahead.
Hmm?
Go ahead.
Yeah, the challenge was that, like, we have a saying, every other person is a spy. So even within your family, you couldn't talk your opinion about a politician or politic or the system. So because every other person is a spy, so you have to like walk on eggshells all the time. But my family were pretty close knit, but then if we were something, if we say something, my dad would say, shh, shh, quiet, you know. And then, oh, the other funny thing is that, so under the communism, 6 o'clock on point, 6 o'clock, the radio will start. Good morning, everybody. Stand up, do your exercise. So we were controlled like that. So we all had to, my parents, as good parents in the system, had to get up all the kids, and we had to do our, the radio will actually lead. Okay, look to the right, look to stretch, 1, 2, 3, you know. And then at night, I forgot exactly what time. I think it's 8 p.m. around dish. The radio will say, okay, it's a good night time, story time. So my parents would gather us together and listen to the stories that the radio's saying. And the bedtime story about monsters to your children. So we all grew up with fear. We were scared of darkness because they told us stories of monsters with 12 heads and huge eyes. And so that was a fairy tale, like good night stories for us. So we were afraid in the dark to because of the stories we've been like night after night before we went to sleep, we would listen, you know. And I used to have a lot of nightmares. And some of my siblings, I think most of them, we were all like, if there was some noise, we would be freak out, you know. So we grew up in fear.
Well, why do you think they told you these scary stories? I was assuming it would be about how wonderful communism is, and they'd create all these different stories, but they were actually stories to scare you?
So I think no, the bedtime stories were like fairy tale, you know, like there was how you say, like fairy tale, you know, there was a bad guy, and then there was a good guy, and then there was a monster, and the fighting off the monster, things like that.
Okay.
So when I was growing up as a child, that was the thing, that was the norm. That's because there was no TV, you know, just radio, and my dad had to use his battery something. There was some challenge there, but everybody had a radio and the radio control. Like in the morning, do exercise, and then at night, I mean, waking up everybody and start your day, and then at night, story. So that my parents would gather us and listen to the story. And then later, I started thinking, wait a minute, I think they told those scary stories just to scare us, to intimidate us, to put fear in us. That was completely unnecessary. And then I learned there are other wonderful stories too. But at the time when we were really little, we thought that's what we get, you know, that's fairy tales. It's a story time, come, you know. And then another thing I just was gonna say, what was it? So the radio, definitely, and then so like everything was structured and controlled. They told my parents how many children they should have. and how they should raise their children. And so it's walking on the tiptoe. But my family were not involved with politics. My parents were herdsmen, and my mother was a carpenter. As they moved back to the small settlement, that's where she worked, and my father was a tractor driver. So, but I think this, because we hear stories, some families whose parents were involved in a politic actually spy, they were spy in the home, like spying out the family or something. Because my parents were protective. So when, for example, in the home, if we're sitting down and having dinner or something, if some of, especially when we became teenagers, we start questioning about the system, right? So if we ask something, say something, my dad used to freak out. Shh, shh, shh. Let's, somebody heard it. And then if you were underage, of course, they would take your dad away to jail, and they would send your dad to a desert, and then those men never came back. You know how many thousands of men they took, and they never came back home. And the people who thought for themselves, who were thought outside the box, that they were boxing everybody, little creative, those men were gone, and they never came back home. And they always said, oh, big political crime. They betrayed their country, they betrayed the land.
I know that Mongolia wasn't always a communist country. It was about for 70 or 80 years, I think. Now, how did the communists and the Mongolians, was it a natural progression? Did the communists loan money to the Mongolian government? How did that work that you guys became part of the communist movement?
Okay, so we were taught in school, because which were completely controlled by the communism, right? So we were taught that this leader, Sukhpatar, he decides, because the Mongols were very still savages, right? And so he decided to go to Russia, ask the Russian big brothers to help. And that's how the communism came. That's what they told us. And they put a big statue for Sukhpatar, and the people praise him for that. But to be honest, I really don't know, because the Mongol has been like 70 years, solid 70 years for sure under communism. So that's like 3 generations, right?
How are your parents and your family? Does anyone still live back in Mongolia? And how is the general population of Mongolia doing today?
So my parents are gone home. I mean, to the eternal home,
Yes,
and all my siblings are still living,
in
and my
Mongolia.
family is still very, very close tight. Mongolia, yes. So the challenge you earlier asked was that my parents, so because they were nomads, all the cattle were also owned by the government, and they actually paid salary for the people. So when communism collapsed, that everybody lost their jobs because everything became you know, privatization. And so people lost their jobs, lost their herd. And so slowly, little by little, my parents bought some cattle and herd, some flock, sheep and goats. We had some horses, cows. So slowly, and then now they were nomads on their own outside the regime when the system collapsed. That's why we did not experience that the city people experience. They become homeless overnight. They became jobless overnight. And many men committed suicide because they lost their jobs and their homes. You know, the government, because everything belonged to the government. So you were slave to the government. And they had different like appraisals, reward system. So if you were a good worker, you got rewarded. If you're a really good worker, they actually will give you apartments, right? But it was all, and people were like, oh, this is a great thing. But if you don't think outside, if you're a person just thinks of survival, today I need bread, then you'll be happy under communism. But if you think a little bit outside that, that's complete enslavement. Because, okay, you're a good worker, we give you this, but then at the end of the day, they own you. Now you are property of your system. You are slave to them. And I remember from my parents and relatives, if there's like the system down to the line, like the local government. So when they see somebody they were like almost like bound to them, and they were scared, and they're always like, and ask us to behave, and not to say my parents really tried to protect us, mostly, I think, because they were not involved in politics. So they knew that if there was something, then we would be in trouble. And then at the same time, we also didn't want, because we've seen other classmates that their father is taken away. So we don't want our father taken away. So we behaved, And then when the communism collapsed, that's where everything rolled down. So I experienced hunger twice, because that during my time in Mongolia, the depression happened twice. So when I was, I think maybe 5, 6, very young, that's one time depression happened. And there was no food. The stores, everything was empty. And the government gave a ticket to each family, depending how big your family is. And we couldn't even buy a whole loaf of bread. So when I was little, I know that we were hungry, and we used to get just tiny bit dry, no oil, nothing, like dry bread. It's not even baked. It's flour and water and then fried on the fire. I mean, we have the cast iron pot, on the fire. And so that was our portion pretty much all day. And then at night, maybe one potato. So that's why I like potatoes. Potatoes are like food it sustained many people throughout the world, right, during the war. So anyhow, but when I was a teenager, that was another depression. That's where I remember everything. So the government gave us tickets, and because I was a teenager, I had to get up. It was during the summer, and I had to get up like 6 a.m., 5:30 a.m., and take the ticket and go to the local store and stand there in line for hours and hours. So all the teenagers of the family, we were all with our ticket waiting in line. So then the store opens, then they start distributing. So finally, when my turn, so I would give the ticket to the people there in the store. So they would look at, and then they didn't give, we couldn't even buy a whole liter of milk. They would measure the milk. I think my family, we were a pretty big family. So they gave us, I think, like 600-gram milk or something like that. And we couldn't buy a whole loaf of bread. I think it was, so they divided the 1/3, 1/4 maybe of a loaf of bread was our share. So standing all day and finally got the bread, maybe a couple of potatoes. I think we had like 4 potatoes or something like that. And then 700 gram milk. I come home and then my mom would treasure those and be really careful not to spill and not to, and then she would cut the bread and we used to get really, really thin slice of bread for whole day. Nothing, no butter, nothing on it. And then because the milk is so Mongolian, every Mongolian family, we make the tea with milk. And that's what the milk was. And then potato, sometimes we shared one potato among
Oh my
siblings,
God. How many
maybe like
children were in your
yeah.
family?
So we got my 2 oldest brother, 2 younger brother, and me. There was another brother, so like 6 children. And my grandmother lived with us during the summer. So with my parents together, we were like 8, 9 people in the gir. Yeah, so I've experienced hunger twice. So
And
that's because the whole system.
what years was that?
I wish I could remember. Let's see. When I was really little, that must have been, I think I must have been 6, 5, and that what year that would be? That would be 1970 something, right? And then when I was a teenager, that was 1980 something. So twice we had depression. And then later I learned as a teenager, later, like, so during that I was like, that was between 12 and 13. And then later I learned some of my classmates, they were never hungry because the parents worked for the government.
Right.
They had plenty food stashed in the back. And then, they embedded in us to memorize the saying, one for all and all for one. So that's what everybody believed. Okay, so if one person is hungry, we feed. And because one for all and all for one, and we support each other. But it's not the system that my family survived and many other Mongolian families survived. It's the family bond. Because Mongolians are naturally very family orientated people. That's how we survive. If it were not for that, we couldn't survive. Not
Well,
the system. And I had actually some disagreements with some friends later on in my young adult age, all because when the communism collapsed, things were really hard. Life was really hard for everybody. So people complaining, oh, we had better off in communism. And no, but anyhow, so we were better off in communism, they said, because at least we had food, you know, but that's not the story.
wow.
And
I
a
think
lot of
that,
people, I'm sorry, there's just so much is coming to my mind. Remembering.
I think you're doing a good job of dispelling. I don't think a lot of people really understand how much communist
No.
propaganda has infiltrated the West. And all of these things that you're saying are completely opposite to what our politicians, our media, and educators say. And just to clarify a few things, I know you've kind of elaborated on it, but I've got a few questions. Does the Communist Party really treat their citizens well? Is there medical care? Is there education for the average person? Is there no poverty? And do communist economic systems boom and reward their citizens for their efforts?
No. No and no. So let me explain. because after the communism collapsed, life were hard, and everybody was saying, oh, communism was better because we had home, we had jobs, we had food, but they owned you, right? So because everything belonged to the government, so you worked for your government, and as I said, they had a pretty good reward system to get people. So if you were a good worker, they got bonus money, and I said apartment. But under the communism, it just like, even look at the building, square, same building, right? So it was all same, and nobody had something different or more except the government officials. They were living in luxury life, but the normal people were all, that's just how it's supposed to be. And nobody was ambitious under the communism. Nobody was ambitious. They were happy they got the job, went to the job, came home, and that's it. And so, yes, the school, the education, health, they were provided from the government, but you were slave. That's how they get you, right? Because their poverty, and I know it's very well, there were some people pretty poor, but the families always carried each other, not the government. I'm going to repeat again. If it wasn't the family bond, that family-oriented culture, we would not have probably survived communism. It's that. And then also, so healthcare, everything, from the government, but because that's how they own you. So you were slave, you were puppets. You only did what you were told to do, period. Like, for example, me, I was in trouble in a school system many times. They called my parents and scolded them, not, they didn't teach well, because I did not behave as I should behave, because I asked some questions. So when I was in school, some teachers loved me, and I even had tea. Some teachers would invite me to the home and we would have tea, but some hated my guts because they were following the complete religion. So it's not true. It looks that way, from the outside, but you are a slave. You owned by them. You have to do whatever they tell you to do. And it's almost like brainwashed. Like, I looked at my parents. Many times I argued with my father, especially when I became a teenager, because my father would not do anything against or different than the government state, right? Because he was afraid. And also that's life, that's normal.
Wow. So there's other
And
things. Can you touch a little bit on women's rights in Mongolia? It seems like the family structure is usually the target of communism. Do they target like
absolutely.
they did in Russia with the forced abortion, like in China? How was that?
So women rights, no, we do not have rights.
Okay.
No, we did not have rights under communism. So this is a very interesting thing. After the communism collapsed, some people complained, oh, communism was better. We had food, we had jobs. But then some people were like, oh, this is great. I can be creative. I can do my own thing, you know. And then, so abortion was birth control.
So it was common.
It it was very, very common. It was birth control. You get pregnant, go to the hospital, government pay you to get aborted. So because Mongolian population was not huge, actually, under the communism, they encouraged to have more children, and they actually rewarded women who had more children. They would give them reward, money, and a batch. You know, my mom had my mom had the second the batch. Yeah, so they actually encouraged because the population. I think they were killing the good people, the creative ones, and then they want because they realize, oh, we're going down a number, we need to increase, you know. I don't know. So yeah, no rights. So and abortion was pretty much encouraged. It was almost like birth control.
And
Everybody
that's what
got
I was
pregnant
told by
and
Russian
went
women
to an
too.
abortion. Yeah, you got pregnant? No problem. You go to get abortion. So that was very, very common thing. It was
Blood
encouraged, it was
sacrifice of the
provided, everything
innocent.
was provided. Hmm?
It's a blood sacrifice of the innocent.
Yes,
Well, on that
for sure.
note, how about the disabled and the elderly? How were they treated under communism?
So we did not see any disabled people or children during the communism. So everybody thought, oh, we don't have disabled people, right? And also no poor people. There was obviously no homeless people. But as again, I said, the family oriented structure. Are we still on? Oh, sorry. So the family oriented structure carried each other. Like my grandmother was 80 something, but the families during the summer she would come live with us. During the winter, my uncle was a teacher and he had an apartment. It was warmer. So my grandmother, in her older age, Mongolian harsh winter, and so she used to go to live with my uncle during the winter. So we took care, the families took care. But I think the people who did not have families, government, they didn't take care of them. And so then later we learned, oh, wait a minute, they were disabled children, they were disabled people, but they were caged in some institution out of the sight, and they died. They had, yeah, so I known people who was growing up in an orphanage that the system, so if the child did something, they used to punish them in electrocuting or something crazy extreme stuff. So
So what you're saying is communism really isn't the glorified solution to world problems that a lot of our world leaders are promoting right now, it seems.
absolutely not. Communism itself is a cult. And when the communism took over, they killed all the spiritual people or the religious. My grandfather, who was a monk, were he died in the caves because he was a monk and persecuted. So he ran away and he was in the caves and he died very young age. So my grandmother was widowed very young and she raised all her children on her own. She never married again. So no talk about God. They themselves were the God for the people. If you ask about God, that was a big threat. So I used to ask about God. Why we are here? Why the sky is blue? There must be God somewhere. Oh, no, no. So yeah, because it is a cult. They are God. You know, every family had a big post of the leader in the home, and they put it in the, so right in the center and the back. So that's like the honorable place, right? So they used to put it there almost like worship. My family was slightly different. Again, my parents were not involved in political. They were herdsmen. And so we had some pictures, but they were not elaborate framed and, you know, worship like that. We had leaders' pictures, like Lenin and, you know, and all the Mongolian leaders.
Now, what would the
But
religion be for
it
most
wasn't
Mongols?
now or then.
Either one. I mean, before communism, and did people secretly worship? You said that your grandfather was a monk. For what kind of faith?
Okay, so during the communism, they destroyed everything to do with faith, right? And they persecuted the monks, killed them, and they destroyed, tear down the temples. And then later we learned that we actually also had a Christian background. The people worshiped the one true living God. But that was persecuted and destroyed. And I remember in school, I think we were in high school or middle school, only one sentence, a certain group of people called Red Cross, and the ethnic Red Cross, and they were an animosity with everybody. So that one sentence we learned. Then later I learned that those group of people were Mongols who worshipped the one true living God. That's why they had the Red Cross was their sign. But they taught us that they were ethnic group because Mongolia a lot of small ethnic groups. So Red Cross, and they were bad people, and they were enemies with everybody. But then later we learned that's not so. So my grandfather was a Buddhist monk. So I never met him, so I don't, but um, he was a pretty famous monk in the temple. But when the communism, he was persecuted and he fled. So,
May God
so
bless his soul.
Buddhism. Hmm?
I said, may God
So
bless his soul. Yes.
yeah. So like this, and then there's Christianity back, thank God. And then there's Buddhism, shamanism, and what else? Let's see.
And is there a
So
Muslim
that's like
influence?
primarily, yes, there's some, we have ethnic Kazakh people, they're Muslims.
Mhm. Well, I know we've had covered a lot that's been going on today. I think I was just going to ask you a little bit about, I'm not sure if you're a history buff or kind of the story, but Genghis Khan is the most famous Mongolian in the West. Do you have any insight on Mongolia and kind of tell us, did he bring Mongolia forward?
Okay, so Genghis Khan was a character for sure. He was very intelligent because he saw the Mongols were indestructible and strong-minded people. So he said, okay, let me unite the people. That's how he built the empire, because he brought people together. And he had incredible strategies for economy, for wars, you know. He was brilliant in that. But I am not a Genghis Khan fan. I respect him because he's my forefather, but
He was a warlord.
yeah. So ah,
He was a warlord.
say it again.
He was a warlord who led armies, so that's not always a real admirable thing.
Yeah, he definitely had a strategy to that was smart to take over people, you know. But then very, very brutal, very, very violent. So I don't support brutality. I do not support violence. So that's no for me. So I'm not a big fan of Genghis Khan. Yeah. And he
Uh,
never like embraced one religion. He looked up into the sky, because that's a Mongolian saying. We all look up to the sky. So I think Mongolians sensed there is a God somewhere, beyond.
he wasn't a Buddhist. Was that the prevalent religion
Maybe
at
I'm the
the
wrong
time?
person. Maybe I'm the wrong person for you to ask about Genghis Khan.
Okay. Well, that's okay. You've given us a lot of information today. Is there anything else that you want to bring up or talk about, or what you have to say to the average American or Canadian who's listening to my show who may be transfixed by some of this leftist movement that we see occurring around us today?
um, yeah, so communism is not pretty. It's pretty ugly. It's a very, very systematic control cult that take away your free will, your of your own mind, as long as you subject to them and do what you're told to do, you're okay. They might even reward you. But if not, you are dead. I mean, they try to take you down, you know? So that's a lot of people who were persecuted and died. And it's not something, because I've talked to a lot of people, since I came to America, they have no clue. And in Europe, they have no clue what communism is. They have slightest idea of what kind of control they have got, because they say, oh, because it's non-violence. Yeah, it's very violent. They attack your essence. They attack your very own person. My maker gave me mind of my own. Get this. If he's the only person have authority to control, like put a chip or tell me what to do, because he made me, right? But he did not. He chose not to. So I have my own mind of I have mind of my own. So when I contemplate, that means I ought to think for myself. Free will, free thinking, right? So who are you to tell me what to think? Uh-uh. You know? So communism is the opposite of that. They will take away slowly but for surely. They will take away your free will, free thinking, and enslave you. They will give you shiny car, nice apartment. They will put bread on your table, but then you're a slave.
Wow.
So
All right. Well,
They
that's
will
kind of a
even
great
reward, they
overview.
might even reward you, but it's all, and then if you are good, because I've seen in the extended family, people who climbed up in that ladder. So if you are a good worker, they will reward you and they give you title and you go up, up. So then you become a complete puppet.
Sorry. Hi. Someone was
Oh,
talking to me on the river
I
path.
thought
Sorry
you were saying that again. Okay.
about
Yeah.
that.
So if you don't want to lose your sanity and enjoy the freedom of speech, freedom of thought, you don't want to be, you don't want to communism. Unless you, if you want to live a puppet, if you just survival mind. Okay, I need roof over my head, bread on my table. Then yeah, but otherwise no. That's all I can say.
All right. Well, it's so
Do you have
valuable.
any question, or did I? Sorry, did I answer all your questions? You
I
can
think you did. I think
re-ask
you gave
if.
my viewers some great insight. Sorry, I keep interrupting. There's a little bit of a time delay, even though we're just 100 feet from each other. We really appreciate your valuable insight into the show, and a lot of people are going to really learn something from our presentation today. Again, I'm sorry about the interruptions, and there's a little bit of shaky quality. We're kind of had a little trouble with our technology today, but we got through. We got our presentation out. We really appreciate everyone joining us. Please remember to do your own research and come to your own conclusions. As always, this presentation is made in hopes that never again will the truth be lost in translation. Thank you for listening. And this is Simone signing off for today.
Thank you so